Hello, I'm Andrew Foote, Chair of Vocal Studies at the UWA Conservatorium of Music, and I'd like to chat with you about the terms strophic and throughcomposed as they apply to musical form. For some of you who have been singing or playing an instrument for years, you may be less familiar with these terms, but you'll recognise these immediately as we explore them. First, let's review the word form. In musical works, form can be used to describe the overall structure of a piece of music. You may have heard terms like verse or chorus, sonata form, da capo aria, rondo form, etc. These are all musical forms. Strophic and throughcomposed could be described as being two extreme points of how a musical composition is formed or structured. Strophic form has been used in music compositions and performances for centuries. In fact, one of the earliest people to use this was the Greek poet Pindar, who used the form in his Pindaric odes, which praised athletic feats. Go figure. These odes employed a strophe or stanza consisting of lines of poetry, and here's our first clue about strophic form. While it does appear in instrumental music, it is almost always related to vocal music, and particularly where poetic text has a repeating metre or a rhyming scheme. You most likely learnt nursery rhymes as a young child. They were almost always strophic. You'll also be very familiar with strophic music in other musical styles, for example, church or ceremonial music, folk songs, or more contemporary music in the 20th and current century, such as jazz, folk, pop, country, western, reggae, and even heavy metal and rap. Rather than explain too much, let's use some simple examples. You'll immediately recognise this. From a poetry viewpoint, we hear a pattern of 6 plus 6 plus 4 syllables. God save our gracious King, long live our noble King, God save the King, followed by a further 6 plus 6 plus 6 plus 4 syllables. This pattern is then set to a rhythm, a melody and harmony. And then we repeat the identical musical information and poetic syllables, but with different words for each verse. This is what gives us the strophic nature. Sometimes this will be written at the bottom of music, as in this example, or sometimes between the staves of the piano or the vocal parts. A quick comment, which is not to do with strophic form itself, is that you'll often see repeating musical patterns or motifs within strophic form. In God Save the King, for example, the rhythm yum pum 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 carries all the way through the song, or the repeated melodic motif. So we see here note, note, up, down, up, then note, note, up, down, down, down. In Advanced Australia Fair, we see the same thing. Here we have identical rhythms and also near identical notes between the first and the second phrases. And you can see here the second phrase is overlaid and highlighted in yellow. While these musical elements can be clues that a piece is applying strophic form, don't rely upon that. Hymns or anthems like these are the most common strophic song. You can visually observe that a song is strophic because it repeats subsequent verses, the strophes, with the same music. As a quick aside, strophic songs can also have introductions, interludes, and postludes. For example, in this fully written out strophic song, where we see an introduction, the first verse, an interlude, the next verse, and the postlude. And you may wish to stop the video for a moment and just have a look at that in a little bit more detail. In summary, strophic form is almost always a song, and where all verses or stanzas of the text are sung to the same music. Why use a strophic form? Well, usually because the words or music need to be memorable and simple to sing. That's why we see strophic form used in nursery rhymes, hymns, anthems, and popular music that have verses and choruses. So if strophic form repeats everything almost exactly, at the other end of the musical form spectrum is a song that doesn't seem to follow any pattern or form, and we call this throughcomposed, composed all the way through. Unlike strophic form, which is almost always related to songs, through-composed music can apply to any combination of instrument and voices. It frequently repeats musical phrases, motifs, or even complete sections, but the music unfolds as a continuous evolution rather than continuously referring back to previous musical sections. A good example of this is Bohemian Rhapsody. We don't have time to examine this in depth, but pause the video if you need to examine any specific aspect. In this piece, we see a broad format of an introduction, the first verse beginning with "Mama just killed a man," the second verse beginning with "Too late," and which ends with a guitar solo, an interlude of "I see a little man," an extension of the interlude which builds into antiphonal call and response, an instrumental solo with different rhythmic pattern, and which proceeds to the taglines "Oh baby," an extension and variation of the instrumental interlude, a slower and reflective section that references previous musical material, and finally, a slowing postlude. This is rather an extreme example, but you can see how through-composed music can have constantly changing elements. There may be repetition, but the unifying element of the work is more likely to be musical keys, or melodic motifs, or rhythmic patterns, or other musical gestures or a story, whether in rhyme or free verse. From a performance perspective, always try to consider why you think a composer made their choice to be through-composed rather than taking the simpler strophic form. It may provide you with clues on how to perform it more effectively. To summarise, strophic form uses the same music in multiple verses, modified strophic form uses similar music with minor variation but still maintains a verse format, and through-composed form has music that is almost always different. If you'd like to explore the term modified strophic, hang around for another few minutes, otherwise stop the video now and explore our other videos for more helpful tips. Thanks for watching. You're still here. Great. Let's move to a variation of strophic form which is called modified strophic form. And this is simply strophic form with some minor variations added. Here we see similar ideas to standard strophic form. We start with an instrumental introduction and then have a repeating 16-bar verse, which also includes some repeating rhythmic or melodic patterns within it. But after this, we head off into another 16-bar section that isn't repeating the same music. Or is it? Look at the rhythms and melodic motifs. They are very similar. More importantly, we then return to the verse again at the end with very minor rhythmic or pitch variation. And just to make things interesting, we repeat the final musical fragments multiple times. Overall, we see this: an introduction, two musically identical verses, an interlude which is musically based upon the verses, a final verse that only slightly adjusts some rhythms, final repetitions of the musical fragments or refrain. The song is clearly strophic overall, but it's not the same strict format as God Save the King. We would therefore call this modified strophic form. As an aside, modified strophic is one of the most common forms used in contemporary or popular music, where composers or performing artists may want the audience to experience repetition of verses and choruses, but they make subtle changes to provide interest. In summary, modified strophic form is almost exclusively restricted to song, where many verses or stanzas of the text are sung to the same music, but where subtle changes are made. Those changes may be combinations of melody, rhythm or harmony, key changes, instrumentation, simple instrumental interludes, dynamic contrast, or the way a verse may end. As I mentioned at the beginning of this video, there are also other forms of music, such as da capo aria, in the form of A section plus B section, and returning to A section, or ABA. Or the rondo, where we keep returning to the first section, so we get A, B, A, C, A, D, A, etc. These may not form part of your syllabus, but you can see how modified strophic starts evolving into these forms. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and thanks for watching. For more information, please check out our other videos.